Hey fam!
Hey fam,
Welcome to our YouTube channel, The
the
A
A
Fam.
fam.
Now this is our third video, and I was telling my husband earlier, we probably will stop counting the videos when we get to like the 100th one.
Right.
But anyways, we're excited to be doing this with you guys. Babes, do you want to tell them what we have planned today?
Today we're going over culture shocks. Some of my experiences when I moved to the US. Things that stood out to me that made me go like, "What? What's that?" Well, we'll be sharing that with you guys today.
Yes.
Right.
And I think our accent already gave it away. But if you do not know, I mean, we'll give you the gist of it. We moved to the US. So we are immigrants. So we were born and raised in a totally different culture. And then we came here. I've lived in the US for about 7 years
7
now. I
Mm-hmm.
know. Saying that out loud is crazy. That's almost a decade.
Been around a while.
I know. And Emmanuel has lived here for almost 2 years. So I think his culture shocks
Yeah.
will be fresh. So we'll go into that. But before we dive into the culture shocks, do we want to tell the people why we enjoy and love living in America? I know no
Oh,
country is perfect, but I
yeah.
mean, I've stayed here for 7 years. So there's probably something I enjoy about this country. We probably should start from there. I'm going to go
Right.
to you first. Why do you love living in America?
So I grew up in Nigeria, and most people who are Nigerians know there's a stark difference
Mm,
in the
mm,
standard of living. So
mm,
America gives you like an equal playing field.
mm,
Opportunities are bound to everybody. It's the
mhm,
same,
mhm.
regardless of who you are. If you're a big man in Nigeria, big man in quotes, meaning you are a rich man.
Rich.
When you come here, you have to be humble,
Yeah, yeah,
and I think that's
yeah,
fantastic for me.
yeah, yeah. I definitely resonate with that. I think it's interesting how you could be like really rich and you still get to drive yourself
Of
in the
course,
US, as opposed to Nigeria. You probably would have like household staff, you
right?
have a chef. And I mean, there
Yeah,
are perks to that, but it's kind of cool to be able to have that playing
of
field
course.
and everybody can
Yep.
has equal opportunity to be successful. I think
Yeah,
for
yeah.
me, what I like about the US, I think it's the ability to be able to reinvent yourself. And maybe that's more of a immigrant point of view. But I feel like if you like living in America, I feel like you can be whoever you want to be.
Right.
Like that American dream, if you're really hardworking, I think it's really true. Like you can come here and be like, oh, I was a doctor in Nigeria, but I want to come here and be an engineer. And you can totally pursue that, and nobody's going to
Right.
stop you. You're literally the architect of your
True.
own destiny. Like
Right.
that's amazing. I don't know how many countries where that's the case. So I think
Right.
that's why I really like America. Like
True.
and so
True.
that's the
The
biggest thing for
downside to
me.
that though is the fact that you can easily get carried away. So
Yeah,
you need to like fully have a self identity,
of
know
course.
who you
Yeah,
are, and
yeah,
just know what you want to achieve. Because it's
yeah,
very easy for you to
yeah.
like get lost in all the
I mean,
options available to you, and
yeah,
then trying
yeah.
so many stuff that eventually don't work out.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
identity is a big thing. I obviously in coined the America. Yeah. Anyways, not to get into that stuff, but yeah, for sure, I totally
Yeah.
agree with you, babe. I also go into the culture shocks.
Yes, this is my
Number
favorite
one
section.
culture shock for you, babe. What was your first culture shock? You came to this country and you're like, dang.
Oh my lord. So I think I didn't expect that I'll come to the US and find people living on the streets. Like literally
Mm,
find
mm,
people who
mm.
don't have homes
Yeah,
living on the streets, homeless people.
homelessness.
I'm like,
Mm.
what?
Yeah,
Am I not in the US?
I
Am I
I
in
know.
Nigeria? Where am I?
Yeah,
Even Nigeria, you don't see like homeless people. Everybody has
yeah,
like somewhere to
yeah.
lay their
Mm,
heads,
mm,
at
mm.
night.
And by the way, Ajegunle, for people who don't know Nigeria, that's like a slum, like a really
Yeah,
slummy part of Nigeria. I
yeah,
agree. I think that was a culture shock for me too. I feel like in Nigeria, you always have like a rich uncle or somebody you can like stay with. Like
true.
homelessness is totally like out of the world for me until I
Right,
moved
right,
here.
right,
And
right.
even till today, like when it's winter, I would probably like pick groceries from the car or something,
Mhm.
and I'll come in and tell the man, I'm like, oh my god, I'm so grateful we have like a warm house to come to. Because guys, like during the winter, I don't know how people do it. So like, yeah, I think yeah, I agree. That's
So definitely a huge shock for me,
yeah, yeah,
um,
for sure, for
and I
sure.
don't think I'll recover from it.
Recover.
Um,
I don't think we should recover from it because then we
right,
become too privileged. We should always acknowledge, like there are literally people who
right,
live on the streets.
true.
But yeah, yeah,
Staying grateful
yeah,
for
it
what we
keeps you
have.
grateful and keeps your heart in the right place.
Hmm.
Anyways, moving on to the next one. What was another culture shock for you?
I think the second thing for me is,
Mm-hmm.
the sense of perfection. We
Mm,
kind of, maybe me personally,
mm-hmm,
I hyped uh, Americans.
mm-hmm.
thinking they have it all figured out, like they have a very
Mm,
perfect lifestyle.
mm.
Kind of similar to what we shared about the homelessness
Yeah,
situation too.
yeah,
But this
yeah,
one's like all round, like they don't have any
yes.
problems, everything
I
is
know,
perfect,
no.
everything is all well
Yeah,
made, they
like
don't
all
have issues,
Americans are rich. Yeah, I think,
bro.
and also from the movies, they show us like like living in Nigeria, like
Mm,
oh bedtime stories. And I know, I mean, I
true.
have friends who actually do the bedtime stories for their kids,
Hmm.
and their life is perfect, and they sit by the dining, and they have that media life. But then, like most of us who live in America,
Bro, it's not
you probably
perfect.
eat in like after a long day of work, you probably like sit somewhere in your
It's not
living room and
perfect
eat,
though.
and it's not perfect.
Nah, nah,
Yeah.
nah.
I think in the
Yeah,
same vein, I think another culture shock for me was how hardworking Americans are.
true,
Geez,
true.
Americans are hardworking, okay? Like I remember
Yeah.
my first shift working in America. I started as a nursing aide, guys, like a CNA. Shout out to all those people who take care of the senior citizens. That's
Mhm.
how I started. So that was my first job in America. And I remember like standing on my feet for 8 hours long. I remember calling my mom and crying. I'm like, oh my God, like this is crazy. Americans are really hardworking guys.
True,
I feel like
true.
the country is not great by accident. They're like really, really hardworking. So that was a culture
Although,
shock for me because I thought,
yeah.
like everybody's like, hey, it's America. We're just chilling.
But I
But
kind of feel
yeah.
like if you lived in Lagos,
Mm-hmm.
Lagos is a part in Nigeria. If you live in
Uh-huh.
Lagos, you
Mm-hmm.
worked in Lagos,
Mm-hmm.
you definitely survive in the US.
For sure. For sure.
Because
For
come
sure.
on, the
Lagos, yeah,
traffic
hustlers,
is
right? People hustle in
yeah,
Lagos, okay?
bro.
Lagos, Nigeria, people hustle. I
Americans are
agree.
actually
I agree.
hardworking. You know, they run
Yeah.
two jobs, some
I
do like
know.
three
People do two
shifts.
jobs.
Combine
Yeah.
that with
Yeah.
the fact that I still have a
Yeah.
family to
I
maintain, kids.
know. I
Sometimes,
know.
like, how do you
Yeah.
do it?
I
But
know.
yeah,
Kudos
true.
to all the hardworking Americans out there. We are definitely our hearts for you. Kudos,
Yep,
kudos,
yep.
kudos.
The
Sure.
difference.
Yeah. I guess I could go for another culture shock. I think for me, the informality of Americans, big time culture shock. Emmanuel was working professionally before moving to the US. So I think he had experience calling people by their first names. But for me, it was big culture shock. Coming from Nigeria, you have to like respect people. You call people
Mm.
auntie, you call people Mr., Mrs., whatever. But like in America, you could be 80 years old and they just call your
Smith.
name. Hi, Jane.
Hey,
I'm
John.
like, what? So yeah, I think I'm still actually
Yeah.
recovering. I feel like I'm still like shocked. Me working at job, at
Mm-hmm.
my job, when you send emails, we say I so and so, and I'm like, oh my God, like in Nigeria, they teach you to say dear,
Right,
dear
right.
Mr. Smith, but you just say I Smith, and
Hi,
I'm
Smith.
like,
Actually, babe, you're not
whoa,
being disrespectful. I think it just
yeah.
boils down to you just calling the first name, keeping it
Yeah,
simple.
keeping it simple.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it was, I mean, for me, I'm just like, wow, you just call your boss John, and that's
Right.
okay.
Yep.
I'm like blown. I'm like blown. I feel like I
Took
still
me a
see
while too.
people like at work that I'm like, how am I gonna call this partner by his first name? And I just do it
Mm.
anyways.
Just do
But
it.
anyways, the
Just do it.
informality of Americans, I think I'm
Yeah.
like, wow, these people are
And
pretty cool.
in sharp contrast to the Nigerian system,
Why
just
would you
the
call your
social
boss
system.
by their
I'm
first
like, what
name?
is are we on good are we okay here?
Yeah,
What's going
yeah.
on?
Let me say the way Nigerians will say, they will be like, when did we start love that we are already kissing? You dare not. Like they'll put you in your place real quick. So I think that's cool. I mean, it's cool, but it's also a
Yeah,
culture
yeah,
shock for me.
yeah,
What about you? What is another culture shock you had when you moved here?
We have a counting system that's different from Nigerian counting system. Celsius versus Fahrenheit,
Fahrenheit.
miles
Yeah.
versus kilometers,
Yeah. Yeah.
pounds
Pounds
versus
versus
kilograms. Yeah,
kg.
yeah, that took
Yeah.
a while. That
That's
took
a
a while.
good one. That's a good
Still
one.
battling that too, but it
Yeah.
took a while.
Yeah. And I mean, another thing is you finally figure out America, right? You figure out how
Mm,
to speak American and everything. And then
right.
you go back to Nigeria and then you have to readjust. You go visiting and you're like, oh, they're like, where's that house? You're like, oh, it's like 2 miles from here. And they look at you like you're crazy. You're like, oh, kilometer from here. So I think being an immigrant, you don't really belong anywhere. And that's the weirdness of,
Sad.
living in your home country and living somewhere else.
I
Do you have any other culture shock you want to share?
accent for sure.
Accent.
Accent is the biggest thing
Accent.
on my list.
Accent. I think we need to debunk something because I feel like Americans don't think they have an accent, but they do.
Hmm.
I see
Yep.
people talking to people who are from other countries, like, oh, you have a strong accent. And in my mind, I'm like, you have an accent too. Like
Right.
me coming from a different culture, I also struggle to hear you. But I feel like I'm like respectful enough
Hmm.
to not say that to your face. But Americans are like, oh, I can't understand you. I'm
Right,
like,
right,
well, I can understand you too. I am struggling here.
right,
I'm, nobody talks like this from where I'm from.
right, right.
And so, like, giving each other grace, I
True.
think is really
Hmm.
important.
There is no standard
Like I listen carefully. I listen very carefully when Americans are talking, but I feel like I don't get the same vibe back.
from
They're
them.
like, oh, why can't you, pronounce and like,
Mm.
like call your words clear.
It could,
Anyways, I'm ranting
yeah.
here.
It could be that some of them just tune off
Yeah, I
when
think
you
they turn
immediately
off.
open your tongue and you talk, and they hear that you
Oh
sound
my
different from
god,
what they are used to. They just
Emmanuel.
tune off. All
When
right.
I first moved
Mm.
to the US, I remember I would remember talking to people on campus and they would just nod and they don't understand one thing I said.
They're not in the
They would,
conversation.
yeah, they would just be like, yes. You could be like, oh, can I get water? And they're like, and in your mind you're like, I don't think, because you're expecting a response and they just don't get it.
Right,
And I'm like,
right.
it's okay to tell me, you like, what did you say it again. But they
Hmm.
would just nod. But anyways, I think the accent definitely for sure.
Sure, sure. Yep,
Also
yep.
still battling that. I don't know if I would ever, lose this accent.
I think one thing that has
But yeah.
helped me, since this is something I battled with, so I can actually share my advice with people who
Mhm.
might have the same issue.
Yeah.
One thing that has helped me is I try to talk slowly,
Slow.
uh,
Mm.
pronounce my words carefully.
Mm-hmm.
When I first came, because the difference was there, so the confidence
Mm-hmm.
too was not really there
Mm-hmm.
to
Mm-hmm.
have conversations with people.
Mm-hmm.
So I usually talk under my breath, and then that
Yeah.
made it more obvious. People would be
Mm.
like, "I'm sorry, I can't hear
Speak
you."
up. Speak up.
So I
Yeah.
think for anybody struggling with that, to speak up, speak
Mm-hmm.
very slowly,
Yeah. Mm.
enunciate the words
Mm.
like
Mm.
clearly.
Mm.
Because if
Mm-hmm.
I'm very slow and speaking the words clearly,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I should already have your attention. You should be like,
Yeah.
okay, so where am I
Yeah.
going with this conversation?
Yeah.
And it really
Yeah.
helps. I think
It
it
does.
really
It does. It
helps.
helps a lot. The only problem is I am not wired to talk slowly. My brain does. I think two paragraphs and then my mouth wants to catch up with my head.
Right, right,
So
right.
I don't. I'm not. God did not wire me like
We will
that.
come up with a
But
solution for
I
you.
know, I need a solution, guys. I can't talk slow because my brain thinks too fast. But
Right.
I agree. That's something like probably personal development. I need to start saying things slower
My wife talks 1,000
so
words per
that
minute.
I can talk like that, okay? Anyways, that's really cool. I guess this is the end of the video. Thank you so much, guys, for watching today. You already
Yep.
know new videos every Wednesdays and follow us on all of our socials.
Instagram, YouTube,
Subscribe away, guys. Instagram is at the AFAM.
at the
That's
AFAM. FAM.
FAM.
Yep.
And you already made it to our YouTube, so you might as well just subscribe right now. Thank you so much for hanging with us today. We'll see you next week, Wednesday.